After an unfortunate ending, Game of Thrones' prequel series House of the Dragon has reinvigorated interest in the world of ice and fire. But if you've watched the show, you still only experienced one piece of a greater story, a book called Fire and Blood. Unlike the other Game of Thrones books, Fire and Blood is not a novel. Instead, it's an in-universe history text that's meant to be read as if you are in the world of the books. While actually written by George R.R. Martin, the book opens with a portrait of its in-universe author. Beneath the title it reads, "Being a History of the Targaryen Kings of Westeros," and marks itself as Volume 1, covering from Aegon the Conqueror to the regency of Aegon III, called the Dragonbane. We see that the name of the author is an Archmaester, Archmaester Gildain, of the Citadel of Old Town. The Maesters are like a scholar, doctor, philosopher, and astronomer all wrapped up into one. Every lord of some repute has a Maester in their household to read their letters, nurse their sick, study the stars, and research new information to add to the collective knowledge of the world. Most importantly, Maesters manage the ravens, which are used to carry messages across long distances. Gildain is an Archmaester, one of 7 masters of a particular subject. They are the authority at the Citadel, the place where people study to become Maesters, located in Old Town. Old Town, as the name might imply, is the oldest city in Westeros. It's ruled by the Hightowers, like Otto and Alicent Hightower in House of the Dragon. The Hightowers have had a close relationship with the Citadel since its founding, as well as ties with the Faith of the Seven. The Starry Sept is a massive church for the Faith, also located in Old Town. This sept was the largest holy place for the Faith until many years later when the Great Sept of Baelor was built in King's Landing. You might remember Baelor's Sept as the place where Ned Stark was beheaded at the end of Season 1 of Game of Thrones. These might just seem like flourishes for the sake of detail, but they are elements that have been deeply considered in respect to the story that Fire and Blood tells. A major theme of the book is the idea of historical bias. The Maesters, the Faith, and the Hightowers are all intertwined with the politics of Westeros, and in many cases, members of these groups serve as sources of the events that are spoken of. The book opens by talking about the, quote, Maesters of the Citadel who keep the histories of Westeros. Their monopoly on scholasticism gives them power in being the sole keepers of knowledge. Importantly, Archmaester Gildain isn't alive during the events that he writes about. He has to pull from multiple pre-existing historical accounts, all of which could potentially contain their own biases and perspectives to consider. A big part of Fire and Blood is the idea that the audience needs to consider the true intentions of the author. While this video series will present the events as they are written, you are heavily advised to think about how the events of this fictional history really played out. Chapter 1. Fleeing the Doom. Years in Westeros are dated BC and AC, meaning before or after the conquest. It's difficult to decide exactly when that switch begins because of contention between scholars on its actual beginning, but most date it from the day that Aegon the Conqueror was anointed in the Starry Sept of Old Town as the first king of Westeros. But before this momentous occasion, we must look even further into the past. Long before Game of Thrones, before the 7 kingdoms were joined beneath the Iron Throne, the eastern continent of Essos was dominated by the Empire of Valyria. Gildain calls it the center of civilization, like Rome in our own history. Valyria is a mysterious and esoteric place, filled with dragons and blood magic. They built massive cities, paved huge roads for trade, and conquered the nearby lands to make slaves of citizens. Valyria was the ancient home of houses Targaryen, Velaryon, and Celtigar, 3 families that in the modern day reside in Westeros. It's unknown when or why exactly the latter 2 of these houses came to Westeros, but for the Targaryens it begins with a man named Aenar. Aenar Targaryen was a dragon lord of Old Valyria, but in the ancient empire, House Targaryen was one of the minor families. In the year 114 BC, Aenar sold all his holdings and took his wives, wealth, slaves, dragons, siblings, kin, and children to Dragonstone, the long-held Targaryen castle in the farthest west outpost of Old Valyria. In Valyria, more than 24 houses warred against each other, rising and falling in an endless, subtle, and often savage struggle for dominance. When the Targaryens left for Westeros, many of these lords saw their flight as an act of surrender. Though Aegon Targaryen was the head of his household, his decision to leave is owed to his daughter, Daenys the Dreamer. Daenys is called the Dreamer because of her vision of the future, the Doom of Valyria. The Doom is an even more mysterious event than Valyria itself. There's plenty of speculation as to what caused it, but what we know is that it was a cataclysmic event of fire and destruction. The event turned the old empire into a wasteland, and led to the deaths of its lords and the dragons they rode. While House Velaryon and House Celtigar also survived, House Targaryen became the only dragon riders left in the world, and they had come to Westeros. Dragonstone appears frequently in the television adaptations. In Game of Thrones, it's the seat of Stannis Baratheon, and in House of the Dragon, it's occupied by Daemon Targaryen. For 200 years, it served as an outpost for Valyria, but now it belonged to House Targaryen alone. Aenar became the first Lord of Dragonstone, working closely with the Velaryons of Driftmark and the Celtigars of Claw Isle as the last Valyrian houses. The Targaryens are obsessed with blood purity, because being a Targaryen is necessary in order to tame and ride a dragon. Because of this, incestuous relationships and complicated family trees are a frequent aspect of Targaryen lineage. Additionally, for some Valyrians, the taking of multiple wives was not an uncommon practice. As such, Daenys the Dreamer married her brother, Gaemon, who would go on to be called Gaemon the Glorious, because he's considered the greatest lord of Dragonstone during the century before the conquest. Why exactly he was considered so glorious, we actually have yet to know. Gaemon and Daenys had a son named Aegon and a daughter named Elaena, though this was not the Aegon that would one day conquer Westeros. After this Aegon was the lord of Dragonstone, it passed to his and Elaena's son, Maeggon. But it would seem something happened to Maeggon, because he was succeeded by his brother Aerys. Aerys had 3 sons, Alex, Balon, and Damian. The lordship passed to the youngest, Damian, and then to his son, Aerion. Aerion Targaryen married Lady Valyria of House Velaryon, and through them was born a boy that would one day become the first king of Westeros. Aegon I Targaryen was born in 27 BC, the only son and second child of his parents. He grew to have 2 siblings, an older sister named Visenya and a younger sister named Rhaenys. Aegon and Rhaenys would go on to be the names of the children of Rhaegar Targaryen in Game of Thrones, killed by the Mountain during Robert's Rebellion. Rhaenys is also the namesake of Rhaenys in House of the Dragon, a contender for the throne at the Great Council and the wife of Corlys Velaryon. Though he is one of the most well-known members of Westerosi history, Aegon is described as an enigma. He wielded the legendary Valyrian steel sword Blackfire, a blade that would go on to cause quite a few problems with some of Aegon's descendants. Aegon was regarded as one of the greatest warriors of his time, but he seems to have taken no pleasure in the act of combat. Westerosi loved their tournaments and melees, but Aegon neglected to ever participate. He rode the greatest dragon that Westeros had ever or would ever see, yet he only flew him for travel or battle and never for pleasure. Aegon had a commanding presence and a charisma that led men to one day join under his banners, but he is said to have no close friends but Orys Baratheon, a companion since childhood. As a ruler, Aegon put trust in his council and his sisters to govern the day-to-day operations of the kingdom, but would not hesitate to take command when necessary. By Targaryen tradition, Aegon was only expected to wed his older sibling Visenya, but Aegon also married Rhaenys. It is said by some that Aegon wed Visenya out of duty and Rhaenys out of desire. Despite this, Gyldayn tells us that there was no doubt that Visenya was the one to be most loyal to her husband. Rhaenys is said to have surrounded herself with comely young men, and the text says it was whispered that she entertained some of these men in her bedchambers while Aegon was with Visenya. However, observers at court would frequently note that Aegon spent 10 nights with Rhaenys for every 1 night with Visenya. Visenya herself is described as being as much a warrior as Aegon himself, as comfortable in ringmail as in silk. Visenya carried the Valyrian steel sword Darksister, later used by Daemon Targaryen in House of the Dragon. She is described as having a harsh, austere beauty, that even those closest to her found her a stern and unforgiving person. Gyldayn says that some report her to have played with poisons and dabbled in dark sorceries. Visenya is contrasted by her younger sister Rhaenys. said to be all her sister was not. She is reported to be curious, impulsive, and given to flights of fancy. Rhaenys wasn't really a warrior. She was more prone to music and dancing and poetry. A real patron of the arts, Rhaenys would often bring singers, actors, and puppeteers into her court and support their lifestyles so that they might perform for her. But Gyldain says that, above all things, she loved to fly. Rhaenys spent more time on the back of her dragon Meraxes than both Aegon and Visenya combined, and hoped to one day soar across the sunset sea in the west to see what lay west of Westeros. Gyldain describes Aegon's choice to take 2 wives as unusual, though not without precedent, and would soon be another point of contention between the people he wished to conquer. Unsurprisingly, the rest of Westeros was not so keen on the idea of incest in their royal family. 5 dragons came to Dragonstone with Aenar and his family, but only one survived until Aegon's life, Balerion, called the Black Dread. Balerion was massive, with a wingspan that could engulf an entire town in shadow when it flew above. His flames were as black as his scales, filled with swirls of red. Though the other 4 dragons were dead by the time Aegon was born, the female dragons had laid at least 2 eggs, and from them hatched the dragons Vhagar and Meraxes. Vhagar can be seen in House of the Dragon, first ridden by Laena Velaryon and later claimed by Aemond Targaryen. Well, she's a grumpy grandma in House of the Dragon. As a younger lizard, her first rider was Visenya. Meraxes was ridden by Aegon's younger sister Rhaenys, and so House Targaryen continued its status as powerful dragon riders. Aegon's journey into the rest of Westeros didn't begin with his conquest. Gyldain states there to be reliable reports of Aegon and his older sister Visenya visiting the citadel of Oldtown, as well as hawking on the island the Arbor with Lord Redwyne. Accounts differ on the possibility that Aegon also visited Lannisport, the town next to Casterly Rock, the great and mountainous castle of House Lannister. See, before the conquest, the 7 kingdoms were just that, 7 separate kingdoms. Like in Game of Thrones, the Starks ruled the north, the Lannisters the Westerlands, the Arryns ruled the Vale, and the Martells ruled Dorne. But at the time of Aegon's conquest, some different rulers reigned in Westeros. In Game of Thrones, the Stormlands are ruled by the Baratheons, like King Robert and his brothers Stannis and Renly. Before the conquest, the Stormlands are ruled by House Durrandon, called the Storm Kings. The head of the house was Argilac Durrandon, also called Argilac the Arrogant. While the Tyrells like Olenna and Margaery ruled the Reach later on, the kings of the Reach then were House Gardener. The Iron Islands and the Riverlands were ruled by King Harrenhal, called Harren the Black, from his seat at the greatest castle in Westeros, Harrenhal. Harren is descended from the Iron Islands, and his grandfather Harwin took the Riverlands from King Argilac Durrandon's own grandfather Auric. Gyldain says there was no king in Westeros more feared than Black Harren, renowned for his cruelty and hubris. King Argilac, concerned for Harren's future conquests, went to Aegon to offer him his daughter's hand in marriage. In addition, Argilac offered all the lands east of the God's Eye, from the Trident to the Blackwater Rush, as her dowry. Aegon rejected this offer. He felt 2 wives was enough already, and he did not need a third. In addition, the lands offered to Aegon were those that Harren's grandfather had taken, so they weren't his to give. Instead, Aegon gave Argilac a counteroffer. He wanted an area called Massey's Hook, and the land south of the Blackwater to the river Windwater and the headwaters of the Mander. Additionally, the pact was to be sealed into marriage not to Aegon, but to Orys Baratheon, Aegon's childhood friend and chosen champion. Argilac was furious with these terms. Orys Baratheon was rumored to be a base-born half-brother to Aegon, and Argilac would not dishonor his daughter by giving her hand to a bastard. Argilac went so far as to cut off the hands of the envoy Aegon had sent and returned them in a box. "These are the only hands your bastard shall have of me," he wrote. Aegon did not write back. Instead, he summoned his friends, his bannermen, and his allies to Dragonstone. Compared to other great houses, the Targaryens had few men. The Velaryons of Driftmark and the Celtigars of Claw Isle were sworn to House Targaryen, and were their largest supporters. From Massey's Hook, the land that Aegon wanted in his deal with Argilac, came the Bar Immons of Sharp Point and the Masseys of Stonedance. Both houses were sworn to Storm's End, the castle of King Argilac, but they had come to develop closer ties with the Lord of Dragonstone. Aegon brought his sisters to council with him, and they went to the Sept to pray to the Seven. Gyldayn marks this as strange and remarks that Aegon was never considered a pious man. On the 7th day after he received Arkelek's message, Aegon sent forth a cloud of ravens to carry his message across the land. From this day forth, there would be but one king in Westeros. Those who bent the knee to Aegon of House Targaryen would keep their lands and titles. Those who took up arms against him would be thrown down, humbled, and destroyed. This is the end of the beginning of Fire and Blood. If you enjoyed this introduction, then please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can be notified for when new episodes release. And don't forget, have a happy birthday. Thanks.